A crashing sky, a roaring scream. A city drowning in God's black tears. I cannot bear to see you.
People kept going missing from my town over the last couple of years. Their mangled remains were all that were ever found of them, if anything was found at all, and many thought that some sort of large predator was to blame. I guess that in the end, they weren't far off, but they may never know the whole truth. At least, I hope not. They erected a bulletin board at the edge of the woods and covered it with missing posters. Even though the passage of time had seen fit to erase them, much like the beast, the images still served a purpose. Not only as a grim reminder of our vulnerability and mortality, but also as a warning of the danger that lurked beyond. A few days ago, my best friend informed me that he would be going into the woods because he needed to retrieve his trail cameras. He had to work until late in the evening, so there was only a short window to get them before night set in. Although he protested, I refused to let him go alone, as I couldn't bear the thought of him becoming the next victim. I didn't have any family left, and the one that remained I never got to see. My father had disappeared many years ago, and my mother and grandparents were all long dead. I was closer to him than anyone else in this world. Though we should have made haste in collecting the cameras, we allowed time to slip away from us. The evening was spent drinking beer, goofing around, and getting distracted by even the most trivial things that we'd stumble upon along the trails. We let our worries fade away and focused on having fun, as we always did. But there's nothing more that I regret in this life than not rushing to get the job done before nightfall, as we planned.
This one was smashed to pieces too, just like the rest. Only a few more left to check,
Rick said to me as we walked back to our ATVs. Didn't know you had so many, bro, I replied, crushing a beer can.
I'd like to know what's going on out here. I've been hoping to get a pic of whatever it is that's been taking our folks too.
Maybe one of the remaining cameras. I stopped short. I heard something large moving through the woods.
Matt, you hear that?
Rick started. Shh, I interrupted, then whispered, turn your light out and get down.
Okay. I'm hunkered down by my four-wheeler,
Rick replied, then crouched down beside his ATV. We both turned off our lights and continued to listen. The sound grew closer and closer until it was almost right on top of us. We remained silent and motionless and tried to peer through the dense brush surrounding us, although our eyes hadn't yet fully adjusted to the dark. All of a sudden, we were overwhelmed by a putrid scent, stronger than any I had ever smelled. It was eerily reminiscent of a corpse, but altogether different and much more intense. I looked over at Rick to find that he was holding his nose. He then shot me a disgusted yet puzzled look. The noises ceased. I placed my hand upon my holster, undid the buckle, and slowly drew my .45 loaded with hollow points. Rick reached up and grabbed his shotgun from the rack on his ATV. Both of us were ready to defend ourselves and each other. Tensions were high as we continued to scan our immediate area. Everything remained still for a time, until a hulking mass burst out of the foliage and went straight for Rick.
Shit!
It was all that he managed to yell before it tackled him. The force from the blow sent his ATV rolling off into the brush. This initial assault was promptly followed by the sounds of ripping flesh and cracking bones. Rick, I screamed, then opened fire in the direction of the hulking silhouette. But my efforts were in vain. It paid no attention to me, nor my barrage of bullets, and they seemed to have no effect on it. I needed to load a new magazine, but when I attempted to retrieve it from my belt, I dropped it. I clicked my flashlight back on so that I could find the magazine swiftly, but made the mistake of having it pointed toward Rick when the beam came to life. He lay on the ground, motionless. His arms were separated from his body. His abdomen was flayed open, and his intestines and organs were strewn about. Enormous chunks of flesh were missing from him, appearing as if they had been bitten off. My stomach turned in revulsion, and feelings of anger and sorrow began to consume me. But they were quickly replaced by paralyzing fear when I brought the beam of light upward toward his attacker. It was humanoid, albeit nothing more than a cruel mockery of the human form. The beast was much taller than any man or ape could ever hope to be. It was hairless, lanky, and its gray skin was stretched tightly over the bones beneath. The beast was much taller than any man or ape could ever hope to be. Its appearance resembled that of a skeleton covered in a thin layer of flesh. It looked back at me over its shoulder, then dropped a chunk of meat before turning to face me. Its eyes were solid white and sunken way back into the depths of its skull. The lips were tattered as if it had chewed them off, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. It sniffed the air, then stared back at me with those hideous white eyes. The creature tilted its head from side to side as it studied me, a look of perplexity beginning to show on its face. Then it pounced. And that's the last thing I remember before I woke up here in the hospital. Once the initial grogginess began to wane, I tried to sit up, but was immediately overwhelmed by a searing pain that ran diagonally across my chest. My head began to pound intensely, and my abdomen felt like it was going to burst. I clenched my teeth and took in a sharp breath before I surrendered and laid back down.
Hey now, take her easy there, Matt.
Dad, I responded, fighting the urge to sit up.
Yeah, son, it's me. Long time no see. Let me sit you up,
he said, before I heard him get up and make his way over to me. He then grabbed the control for the hospital bed. Where have you been all this time? I asked, as my upper half was elevated.
It's a long story. We'll get there,
he replied, then laid the control back down and returned to his seat in the far corner of the room. I hadn't seen him for many years, and time hadn't been kind to him. The skin that I could see was covered in various types of scars. He had a shaggy beard, his hair had turned gray, and he had massive bags under his eyes. His appearance gave the impression that he hadn't slept in ages. He looked like a man who had seen and been through more than his fair share. What? What happened? Is Rick? I exclaimed as memories of the incident began to spring forth.
He's gone, son. And you're lucky to be alive.
My eyes began to well up with tears. No, that thing. There was some kinda creature. Dad, it killed.
Easy now. It's all right, boy. There was nothing you could have done. That thing is no natural beast.
Well, I began. What kind of beast is it?
Patience, son. We'll get to everything in time. Let's start from the attack.
Okay. Then how did I end up here? I asked him.
It slaughtered your friend, then started on you.
He leaned back in the chair and crossed his ankle over his knee.
That's when I showed up to the rescue. You're lucky I got there when I did.
I was taken aback. You saved me?
Yup.
We sat in silence for a moment, staring at each other, neither knowing what to say. Then I finally spoke up. What made you come back? How'd you know where to look? I asked.
I know I'm not exactly an easy man to get a hold of,
he said in a flat tone, masking his sarcasm. That's an understatement, I interrupted, my words carrying just a touch of aggravation. He ignored my commentary.
but I finally caught wind that something has been happening to the people here for quite some time. I had an inkling of what it was right away and rushed to get here.
My father stared at me for a moment, then got out of the chair and walked towards the door of my hospital room. He slowly leaned his head through the doorway, looked left and right to see if the coast was clear, then quietly shut the door. Dad then promptly turned the deadbolt into place before returning to his seat.
Anyway, I got to town and started collecting information. That's when I learned that you two dummies went up the trail. I knew nothing good was gonna come of it, so I took off after y'all. Got to you just in time.
So you saw it?
Yup, but it ain't the first time.
I was puzzled by this. My father was always mysterious and cryptic, the few times that I did get to see him growing up. But for him to know that a creature like that exists and do nor say anything about it, it didn't add up. I hit it several times with my .45 and didn't faze it. What did you do to get it off me? I asked him.
Simple. I shoot it off with a torch and then hit it with a big old Molotov for good measure,
he replied smugly.
Now, that ain't enough to kill it for good, mind ya. But it was enough to drive it away so that I could pull you out of them woods and get you some help.
Then I guess I should thank you, I said, lowering my head to the side before looking back at him. So, thanks. But still, what is that thing? And where did it come from?
I can't tell you what it's called. Saying it draws him. Talk about it is bad enough by itself,
he answered before dropping his head for a moment, then looked back up at me with a solemn look on his face.
But I think it's time you knew.
My father then began to tell me the truth behind everything, the profound reality of his life story.
I was just a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, when my parents told me the good news. I was going to be a big brother. They left me with my grandmother while they went to their ultrasound appointment. My parents were bursting at the seams with joy when they came to pick me up. They then gave me the best news of my young life. My mother was carrying twins. I can't even begin to describe the glee that I felt at that moment. The prospect of finally having not only one, but 2 younger siblings filled me with unbridled excitement. I couldn't wait to meet them, teach them, protect them. Times were hard. Money was scarce. But we were all ecstatic, nonetheless. I wish I could say that my mother had a smooth pregnancy, but she was sick all the time, barely ate anything, and rarely ever acted like herself. Her doctor feared that the lack of nutrients would harm the twins. I wish we had known how right he was. As time went on, she became more irritable, more angry towards everyone. We didn't know whether it was the hunger, the pregnancy, or her sickness. All we knew was that something was terribly wrong. Regardless, we tried our best to take care of her and make her happy. One day, they came back from an ultrasound appointment in tears. They told me to go into the other room so that they could speak with my grandmother in private about the situation. But I, being a kid, made it my mission to find out what the adults were talking about. I crept across Grandma's shag carpet, careful to not make a sound, until I was finally within earshot of their conversation. Mom had lost one of the twins. The ultrasound showed that only one of them remained in her womb. She said that there was no bleeding nor signs of a miscarriage, and that her doctor said the gestational sac may have been absorbed by her body, or perhaps the remaining twin, although she was further along in her pregnancy when this phenomenon typically occurs. I remember crying about the loss, but I was still happy that one of them was okay, and that I'd still get to be a big brother soon. I retreated into my play area and fiddled with my toys as I quietly sobbed to myself. When they were finished going over the sensitive information, my parents came to find me and gave me the edited version. Although one twin didn't make it, my remaining sibling would be my little brother. The closer that Mom got to her due date, the more her condition worsened. She progressively ate less and became more belligerent. Losing one of the twins didn't help much either. And neither Dad nor I knew how to console her, nor what to do for her. Sometimes even the smallest thing could set her off. So, we walked on eggshells and minded our P's and Q's. My old man and I spent a lot of time out back in the shed, where he taught me how to tinker with, clean, and repair various things. I cherish the time we spent together during those days. Other than the time that you were born, they are my favorite memories. Now one day we were out in the shed. We heard blood-curdling wails of agony emanating from our house. My father and I looked at each other in confusion for a split second. Then our eyes widened as we simultaneously realized that it was my mother. We dropped everything and took off sprinting towards the house, both of us calling for her. My father was the first to reach the back door, throwing it open with such force that I thought it would smash through the kitchen wall. We tore through the house toward the bedroom, knocking over the furniture in our path in a mad scramble to reach her. Upon arriving at the bedroom door, my father grabbed a hold of the knob and put his shoulder into it, nearly ripping it off the hinges. And neither of us could believe what we saw. My mother laid sprawled across the bed, motionless. Her abdomen was split open, appearing as if something had forced its way out from her inside. The room had been overtaken by the stench of decay, as if something had been festering in the room for weeks. Crouched inside of the gaping hole was my baby brother. Although he looked nothing like a human infant, I knew right away that it was him. His skin was gray, like the flesh of a corpse, tightly stretched over a lanky skeleton. He was hunched over, rummaging through my mother's flesh and organs as he took bites from various chunks. My brother then realized that we were there, watching him in horrorized disbelief. Now he stood up and turned around to look at us with those ungodly, pasty white eyes and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth that were littered with pieces of my mother. He turned his head upward, sniffed the air a few times before returning his gaze to us. The sight chilled us both to the core and admittedly caused me to wet my pants. My father came to his senses much quicker than I did and promptly reached for the baseball bat that leaned against the dresser. My little brother fell forward. He threw his gangly hands outward to catch himself, then entered into a doubled-over position as he arched his back. His spine began to pop and grow rapidly. The skin pulled over his bones, stretched ever tighter to accommodate the growth, and we watched in disbelief as it doubled in size right before our very eyes. Once the process had finished, he looked up at us and emitted an ear-splitting screech, which sounded like a combination of a scream and a hiss. My father drew back the bat, fully prepared to strike, but before he could, my little brother leaped down to the floor and then launched himself through the closed window, smashing it into oblivion. "Looks like it's gone. You alright, boy?" he asked me, then dropped the bat and embraced me for the last time. "Come sit outside. I gotta call the law." When the police arrived and saw the scene, they immediately arrested my father. They blamed him for my mother's death, and claimed that he had disemboweled her before doing God knows what with my little brother. They wouldn't listen to anything he nor I had to say about the matter. They ruled him criminally insane and sent him to the mental hospital to live out the rest of his days, which wasn't very long. Unable to cope with what he had seen, on top of being blamed for the death of the love of his life, he was crushed by the weight and eventually committed suicide. They found a short note scrawled in blood on the walls of his room, which read, "Forgive me, son. I love you."
So, you're saying that the thing I saw is, I started before my father cut me off.
That's right, Matt. It's your uncle.
My father replied.
I've spent my whole life learning about him and things like him ever since. All the time I've been away, I've been hunting.
Hunting? I asked, both confused and curious.
Yep. Your uncle vanished from this area after the incident your pawpaw and I witnessed. But now he's returned. My mind has been consumed with the desire to find him and put him down since that day. After many years, and more than my fair share of experience, I finally know how.
Now all of the visible wear and tear on his flesh made sense. I see. But why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? Why did you let me continue to believe that Papa was a lunatic who murdered Mama, and that you had turned your back on me? And where did you learn how to fight these things?
I wanted to protect you. I felt you were better off hating your pawpaw and me than knowing what's really out there. But now, I ain't got much choice.
He responded, before addressing the rest of my inquiry.
Your uncle ain't the only kind of abomination out there running around. I've been a little bit of everywhere, talking to folks who know the truth, folks who learn from their predecessors and pass on knowledge to people like me. It's a rabbit hole that goes back for millennia.
Well, in that case, why haven't you taken care of my uncle yet? My father looked away for a moment, then leaned forward in the chair. He interlocked his fingers and brought them to his lips in contemplation.
Well, to be perfectly honest, son,
He dropped his head.
I couldn't do it.
I became irate, disgusted with his response. What do you mean you couldn't do it? Look at everything he's done.
I know, boy. I know that I should be more than capable and willing. But in the end, he's still my baby brother. I loved him before since he was even born. And for that strange reason that I can't explain, I guess that fact alone was enough to prevent me from finishing the job.
You're unbelievable, I barked at him. So what then? You're just gonna let him continue to stalk our woods and kill people? Dad looked down at the floor in silence for a while, before eventually bringing his gaze back to me.
Of course not, because I'm gonna teach you how to kill him. Once you've seen something like that, there ain't no going back to the normal life. Anyways, I'm gonna teach you everything I know.
You can't be serious. Me?
Why else would I be here explaining everything to you? If your friend Rick wasn't enough of a reason to get riled up, now you have another.
I didn't know how to respond. In all honesty, my feeling of irritation towards Dad and his reluctance to end this when he had the chance nearly made me refuse and lash out at him in spite. But I then began to weigh those emotions against how I felt about all of the pain and devastation my uncle had wrought. My anger quickly turned into determination. He was absolutely right. I wanted to. No, I had to kill this beast. I'll do it, but not for you, old man. For Mom and Pops, and for Rick, for every other life that bastard has cut short. My father cracked a smile and chuckled a little. He tried to hide the pride on his face as he spoke.
That's my boy. We've got some time before you're healed up enough to start with the physical training, so we might as well start with the basics.
He reached down beside the chair and retrieved an old weathered backpack. He pulled open the zipper, reached inside, and brought forth 2 thick, leather-bound books. One was fresh, while the other was visibly tattered and worn.
This
He started, then got up out of the chair and walked over to me.
is everything I've seen, everything I know. It's ours to share.
He handed me the old one, then held up the fresh one.
And this is yours. Here's a pen. Start whenever you get the notion.
Dad, my father cut me off.
Start reading. There's plenty of things in there you need to know before we move on.
Okay. Thanks, Dad, I replied solemnly. My father turned away and headed for the door to my hospital room, opened it, then looked back at me before exiting.
I'm gonna leave you to it for a little bit. I'll be back with something to eat.
He lowered his head and turned back to the doorway.
And I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can understand and forgive me. I'm sorry about your mother.
He stepped through the doorway and left before I could say a word. I flipped the cover of my father's book and began to read. This handwritten journal went into detail about his many horrific experiences with a plethora of beasts, which, until now, I had believed to exist only in nightmares. It was also rife with descriptions and statistics, abilities, weaknesses, and recounted how he had not only managed to track, but also slay a great number of them. This information instilled a newfound respect for my father within me, an appreciation for him that I never imagined I'd have in all my life. My father is a hardcore, seasoned hunter, and soon I will be too. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more horror content. If you have any real cryptid encounters, or you're a horror writer wanting to share your stories, please feel free to email me in the description anytime.